Welcome to the Releasing Community podcast. This is where we share our love for releasing and the Sedona Method. We share our gains, our insights, and experiences from using the method. I am Katja Törmänen, and I am hosting this podcast with Stephen Robert Carlson.
Glad to be here.
And today our guest is Joel Funk. Joel is a certified transformation and recovery coach who offers private sessions. He specializes in using awareness-based practices as a catalyst for positive change, integrative health, and preparation and integration of plant medicine and psychedelic therapies. Joel has been using the Sedona Method since 2005 and took his first facilitator training in 2007. Warm welcome, Joel. Nice to have you here.
Great introduction. I was not, I'd totally forgotten about that. So
I think you wrote that, in fact. So
I did. That was such a long time ago that I did that. But hey, that's just, I was like, man, that's a great bio. Who wrote that? I was like, oh, I did.
Okay, wonderful. So let's start with the question we always start with, which is, how did you find the Sedona Method?
All right. Around that time, 2005, a few years before that, my health had collapsed. And by that, I mean, I was in college and I was, waking up before class and going surfing and then going to a full load of class at a very academically rigorous school and working out in the afternoon and then go study at night and skateboard as a nightcap, So I was full day, social life, everything, friends. And then it seemed like overnight I couldn't stay awake. I was falling asleep in class. I couldn't take notes. I was, I think I remember it being wintertime. And in the winter, like when you duck dive under waves, you get ice cream headaches under every wave. At least I would. And even then, I was so drowsy, I couldn't paddle out. I was so just exhausted. It was just this immense drop in fatigue that was debilitating. And it was like, what the heck is going on? Something's wrong with me. It didn't clear up, I wasn't a drinker of caffeine. I immediately started pounding caffeine to try to you got assignments coming in. You've got to produce. You can't just sleep all day. So that began a long journey of me trying to figure out what to do. And I eventually found ways of studying that in combination with caffeine allowed me to actually improve my grades. But it was a long, slow process of fumbling my way through, okay, as soon as I sit down, I fall asleep, I'll get up and walk. And I started talking out loud and acting like I was an actor trying to learn a script. And then I would go out into nature and I'd spend hours out in nature, talking, learning, using different accents, and actually improved my grades. So I went from a B student to an A student. So that was cool, but that was just sheer willpower. And, I started the usual suspects of okay, doctors, what can I do? I had good health insurance at the time. And then also I started taking an account of myself, okay, what am I doing that I need to stop doing? And what am I not doing that I need to start doing? And so I kept it really simple. And when I started asking those questions, I was taking a nutrition class. I was like, okay, I can clean up my nutrition. So I started experimenting there. I experimented tons of nutritional protocols. I also started doing things okay, I can't exercise like I used to, but what can I do? Okay, Tai Chi and yoga and meditation. I started doing those things that were a little more gentle instead of things that required a much higher level of energy. And being a young guy, that's all I wanted to do. That was I wanted to be an artist. I wanted to live on a tropical island and surf my brains out and get away from the madness of Western society in Southern California and just live the dream life, right? But all that was just collapsed. So I began searching. I got many diagnoses, many different treatments. Most of them did not work. So I just kept on saying, either I'm going to stay like this, or I'm going to use the pain of not being able to live the life that I wanted to live to motivate myself to do things that I didn't want to do. When you're that age and you want to do the things that you want to do, the last thing you want to do is be tied down with a health protocol or in doctor's offices and constantly in that revolving door of what do I do? Like, I feel like crap. And, oh, you've got this diagnosis. The first one I got was narcolepsy. Well, there's nothing you can do about narcolepsy. It's just like, get on disability and sleep. That was one of the doctor's advices at Scripps, one of the main doctors in San Diego. Like, you're trying too hard to get better. Just give up, get on disability, call it a life, sleep all your life. I was like, doesn't sound like my life. So 2005 was probably 5 or 6 years after I had started that journey. And so I, through a series of things, just constantly, okay, this didn't work. What's next? This didn't work. What's next? I developed kind of like a scientific attitude or approach where I was a science experiment and I was also the mad scientist, or at least it turned out to be a mad scientist, because you kind of had to be mad to keep going, facing what I was facing. So it was debilitating fatigue, depression, and other symptoms like physical symptoms, digestive issues, things like that. So foggy head, just unable to like process information, just feeling really slow. So I was doing yoga at the time, living in Huntington Beach, and I saw a flyer to this thing. I went to that thing. I wasn't really into that thing. It was like personal growth, rah, like peak potentials was the thing. And it was like all rah, and like force and will your way through. I was like, dude, I don't have the strength for that. But through that, I saw a thing for the Sedona Method. And that's how I got introduced to the Sedona Method. I listened to it. I was like, oh, this is much more accessible to me. Doesn't require all this forcing and willpower like the Tony Robbins version of personal growth, which is great. It has its place. So I'm not knocking it. I'm just saying, when you're in a low energy state and you have actual issues that need addressing, you can't force your way through them. You need a multi-pronged approach. And so I listened to the Sedona Method. I looked online. There was a retreat, I think, in a week. And I bought the CD course, and it was back in the day, right? CDs. And I had a CD changer. I had a little Honda Civic, and I put all the CDs in the CD changer in the trunk of my car. And I drove 7 hours from Huntington Beach to Sedona. And I listened to the course on the way to the retreat, and slept in my car. I was broke. I was like barely able to work. I think I got a scholarship to there. I begged them. I was having to like beg, steal, and like to do anything and everything I possibly could to like do the things I didn't have enough money to do, because I couldn't afford. I had insurance, and then there was nothing else. So anything that insurance didn't pay for is like, how can I figure out a way to go to this thing that I think could help me? So that's what got me there. And that's a good start to how I got introduced to the Sedona Method. And kind of a funny story, my experience being there, and we can talk about that. But that's a good thing to just get us started as I got introduced to the Sedona Method, and my story and my journey and whatnot.
I just have to say, I love this image of here you are driving, 7 hours from Huntington Beach with all of the CDs listening nonstop.
Retreat before the retreat.
I can relate to that. Yeah, exactly. Because I certainly binged my first CDs as well. Exactly the same thing. 3 weeks nonstop.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nice.
So, you say you have a funny story about that retreat. Please share.
Yeah. So I'd done a few meditation intensives prior, and they were on, let's say, well, the guy who led those meditation retreats, he was a big time martial artist, like a triple black belt. So it was very masculine and intense. It was like you meditate for 16 hours a day, absolute silence, and you go deep within. And that was great. Like, I had some major breakthroughs and some major ahas. But you go to the Sedona Method, and it's the total opposite. It's like totally relaxed. You have a 2-hour lunch. You can talk, and you can like hell was letting people like share for like 40 minutes straight. Internally, I was just judge. The mind was just like, what the fuck? Like, when are we going to get on with the meditation? When are we going to like do the thing? Come on, I came here, I'm suffering, like hook a brother up, like shut the person down and like, let's get to meditating. Right. And so that was the dialogue. Right. And then also the way the Sedona Method, I'm going to say this because hell has admitted this, right? The way the Sedona Method is marketed. It's marketed to the average individual who still thinks they're a person and they have a story and their money matters. You know what I mean? All those things, right? Increase your money, increase your health. And that's what spoke to me. So when I get there, and immediately he pulls the rug out from everybody and he goes, there is no person, and that's what this is really about. And it's just like, F you like bait and switched us, you little bia, you know, like I was so pissed. And I was like, all right, I'm here. What the hell am I going to do? Okay, I'm not interested in non-duality. I could give a F about that. But the only thing that I'm interested in non-duality about is the fact that if the person goes, no me, no suffering, right?
Mm-hmm.
That was the only thing that resonated with me. I still wanted to have a magnificent life and be a brilliant this and that, you know, and like have the sexy like vocation that everybody's like, oh my gosh, you get to do that. You're so lucky. And you know what I mean? I wanted that life.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the only reason why I was there, to like get rid of this crap so I could get on with like my life. And so I was like, all right, whatever. I wrote it off, or I just like kind of like put all those judgments to the side. And I said, okay, I'm here. I'm not leaving. Like, what can I get out of this, you know? And by day 4, all of a sudden, it just sat there feeling like you're doing nothing, right? And you're just like, what's going on here? You know, like, what is this all about? 4 days of just, and and then all of a sudden, I was like, I think I feel better. You know, it's like on the 4th day. For no reason whatsoever, I just kind of feel better. That's cool, you know? And I started laughing, you know, at some of the jokes, you know what I mean? Some of the humor, because it can be very funny. And sometimes people are just laughing for no reason. And you're like, what the heck? Why are they laughing for no reason? So I started to like find my rhythm in that space. And then by the end of that day, I felt like I was on ecstasy, like the drug ecstasy. But it felt so much cleaner and so much better. And I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. So that was like my first breakthrough. That wasn't really a breakthrough. It was just like a gradual improvement in a sense of well-being. And then that lasted for like 3 weeks after. Like I hated doing the menial maintenance stuff of life. You know, when I would get home, like just doing the dishes, the groceries, you know, laundry. As I was, you know, living in a shabby apartment with like a tiny little room with like 2 other dudes, like 3 grown men in a tiny little room in Huntington Beach. Like you no washer, no dryer, you know, a slumlord, and you're just having to like do what you got to do. And the whole time doing it when you feel like you're 100 years old, sick and tired, and you don't want to do any of it. All of a sudden that was lifted. And I just got around to doing the things that I needed to do without any resistance, without any care. I just was enjoying myself. I was like, this is it. That's when I had like that moment of like, this is it, this huge aha, this huge like sense of resonance of like, it's so easy. We've been given everything we already needed. You know, I grew up in a Christian context, a religious context, and it was like, you know, Jesus save us, you know, we're suffering. And then it was like, oh wait, no, like we've already been given everything we already need. It's just up to us to use it, the tools appropriately. That's how simple it is. Okay, right on. So that was my first experience with the Sedona Method.
That sounds like quite a good experience to begin with.
One thing you mentioned just now was that the high that you were feeling with the Sedona Method at the end of the whole retreat was similar to ecstasy or MDMA. Is that right?
Yeah.
My experience, because I've actually tried both of those and know them, is that's totally heart opening. That's the energy of the heart.
Yeah. That's their MDMA and let's say clean ecstasy. Let's say, because you know ecstasy bought on the street is cut with a variety of things. So let's just put it out on a precautionary note to always know your supply and test it if you are doing those types of substances. So that's our little disclaimer. But yeah, they are heart openers.
Or not, and a therapist with these.
Yeah, I do work with those medicines. They are called heart openers for a reason. They are also called empathogens. They make you very empathic in being able to connect with other people, whereas like the other psychedelics can be called entheogens. You know, so the MDMA, the ecstasy, the MDA, those are Kana. Those are other heart opening medications. that tend to help people overcome their resistance, their blocks, their filters, and be like, oh, there's another being in front of me. Wow. This is amazing.
Yeah, exactly. I've worked with some people over the years, known people over the years who are experienced in those things. I cannot do them anymore. It's just that my work has brought me to the point where actually I'm open enough. Thank you. It's just, that substance is like, it's a little bit. But what I have seen, though, is how valuable it is for people to have a taste of that. And I think that's actually one of my favorite teachers is Dr. David Hawkins, and he talks about the experience of these substances. They're really here to introduce us to what we normally, in the natural state, we do experience as normal.
Yeah.
Including things like laughing for no reason.
Agreed, which can happen on substances or in a Sedona Method retreat or other forms of retreats, where people are releasing, letting go, and energy is moving. People hit those, veins of just laughing for no reason whatsoever. And I would agree 100% with what you have to say. I guess one of my jobs as a coach in the psychedelic plant medicine realm is that so many of us are coming from such a state of desperation that we're so far, let's say, off track as human beings, right? As far as what the natural state is. And so those medicines help us reach the mountaintop, so to speak, but they don't keep us there. And so when people have a peak experience on any of those medicines, like the mistake is, I need to do more to get back to that state. And so then that becomes a vicious cycle because you can open up too many, let's say, doorways in consciousness and become very unstable. So that's the danger with those medicines is they are power tools. And just like with all power tools, whether it's a saw or a hammer or a car, these medicines are very powerful and they can open you up to very amazing things. They can also introduce you to, let's say, all the stuff that's in the way. So it can be a very harrowing journey. Let's call it a hell experience. But that's like, let's say, showing you, hey, this is this old stuff that just needs to go, like, let go. So that's the other side of the coin. As Adyashanti would say, God's other face or the backhanded side, God's backhand. So that can show up in many different ways. But yeah, that's the good part about these medicines. And in our society today, where we're so thick-headed, sometimes we do need a little bit of a sledgehammer to kind of crack things open a bit. And, I think I needed that as well. So
did they come to your life like after that first Sedona Method experience, or were you familiar with them already before?
Recreationally, I didn't do a lot of drugs growing up. I grew up in public schools in California where, like I had friends who tried LSD in 5th grade. Most of my friends started smoking weed in 7th grade. I didn't. I came from a more conservative household, and it was the just say no era, right? So there was a lot of like real and, misperceived negative effects of drugs and mind-altering substances. So some of them are real, like there are negative side effects to certain medicines, but that's a whole nother conversation to have. So I held off. But yeah, I did do a small amount of ecstasy, street ecstasy. I had a friend growing up who happened to be one of my church leaders. Who became the biggest drug dealer in town, So he was the first one to introduce me to ecstasy. And so that was like, oh my God, this is amazing, and I did mushrooms and LSD just a handful of times, but mostly it was just cannabis and alcohol recreationally. And then I stopped when all my symptoms started. I was like, no more of this stuff, like if this is contributing to the way I feel, like it's not worth it. And so it wasn't until maybe 15 odd years that I reconsidered entheogens, plant medicine specifically, as something that could, like the conscious use of it. So I did ayahuasca about 15 years ago. And I did that maybe about 15, 20 sessions over the course of 2 years when I was living in Venice Beach up in Topanga, Malibu, was doing ceremonies up there. And that was a really rough experience. So, my journey in the Sedona Method, just to kind of bring it full circle back to the Sedona Method, I had that amazing experience.
Mm-hmm.
And so I kept going back. I didn't have any money coming in. I was like just barely living on anything. It's like, how do I get there? So I just started putting it on the credit card because I got that big aha, but my symptoms weren't resolving over the long term. I was still struggling. It was still just like, what the heck? Like, okay, that was great, but I collapsed. After 3 weeks, I was back in the crapper again, in that same rut, trying to figure things like, what's next? What's going to actually help me sustainably move forward in life? I'm in my mid-20s. I need to start working, So I was trying to cobble together a career. And so I went back to the second retreat, and over the course of maybe 4 years, I think I did 7 retreats, and that was including the Facilitator Training, which were kind of tagged on to the end of a 7-day retreat or a week-long retreat. And it was my experience, unfortunately for me, or fortunately, was every time, like I went back the second time and I had a great experience, but wasn't quite as peak as the first one. Like a third time, and it was good, but not as good as the second time. And then the fourth time, it was like neutral. I kind of left in the same place that I was at. The fifth time, I left worse, and so it was kind of the law of diminishing returns, kind of like you get with like a drug. You take some, and in order to get the same effect, you have to take more. So we didn't have the same like network, like social media and technology was not where it was at now. The only way you could access the graduate support calls were on a landline. I didn't have a landline, so I couldn't like access those calls. I was technologically challenged. I couldn't like just download them. You couldn't put them onto your phone. You had to have an iPod at the time or some MP3 player. So there was just a lot more challenges that got in the way. So after 4 years or so of like, okay, this is really going to be it, I really left like traumatized and dejected and in a really like down, like crestfallen place. Like this thing that I thought was going to save my life was going to be enough. Like all my dreams around it have died and crushed. And so that was a really hard time. And I really had to shift my focus into more releasing is enough, which I think is a big mistake. For some people it can be. We can have that conversation that releasing is enough to solve everything. That was one of the things that really inspired me was Lester's story, right? That's all he did. Released, and all of his health issues were done in 3 months. Like he was like good to go. So I was like, dude, if he can do it, I can do it. And I was all in on that, right? And so to then be like, oh my gosh, I still feel like crap. I can't get out of bed. What's wrong with me? I started to shift my focus more on from like spiritual, like healing alone to where I was eating and exercising and doing all the right things. I was still forcing myself to go to yoga class every day and things like that, and taking walks on the beach and doing rounds of EFT like a madman, and so I just started to focus more and more on the medical side of things. At the end of that, I was like, well, maybe I do need more medical treatment. And in the end, I did. But so that's what eventually going down that medical route brought me back to ayahuasca eventually. About 15 years ago. Yeah. So that's how I got introduced.
I just wanted to interrupt you to understand the timeline. When was your first retreat, Sedona Method retreat?
October 2005.
Oh, 2005. Okay, then. Right. And then you spent an intense 4 years after that you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, 4 years after that. So up until 2009, I was really dedicated to Sedona Method and like things like EFT, like that ran its course. I had an EFT practitioner. I really want to give people a sense of like, not everything works for everybody. Like these are all good tools. Like EFT is a great thing, but I reached my like to have all like that was I found EFT before the Sedona Method. And to find these things where you can apply this to yourself, you're not dependent on a doctor or prescription. Like these are amazing revelations, but then to have that big uplift, and then to have after years of like, you didn't just try it a couple times, oh, it doesn't work. Like you dedicated yourself to it. I would joke around and say like I had like indentations, like where you tap an EFT, you know what I mean? Like permanent indentations. In my, from tapping, I would spend up to 4 hours a day tapping, because what else am I going to do? Because I felt like so much crap. I was only able to spend so much time doing professional type work. The rest of the day, it's like, what are you going to do? I would meditate. I would tap. I would release. I would go for walks. I would try any way to like hack. You know, this is hacking, like biohacking or spiritual hacking before it was a thing, right? And so I tried many different EFT practitioners, and eventually they referred me to the lady who was the best at the time. She was a psychotherapist for 30 years and the EFT master who everybody sent their most challenging cases to, and she was able to resolve them. After 5 sessions with her, she's like, Joel, because I was short on money. This is why she said this. Joel, I'm happy to keep working with you, but I've only seen a handful of cases like you. There is no modality that will ever work for you. The only thing that works for you, for somebody in your position, is divine, miraculous intervention. Trying to do EFT with you is like trying to carve a block of marble with a wooden spoon. Like we're just getting nowhere. And because I'm happy to keep working with you, but because money's an issue, you know, I just want to let you know so you could make a choice. So I was like, I mean, that was a rough pill. So I had a lot of those types of experiences. And so it's just really rough to just keep getting shattered. That's how it felt, just so demoralized and shattered. Like this thing that I thought was going to help me after 5 years of dedicated work, it doesn't work. I've got to shift gears. I've got to like back up and find a new way forward, because I can't give up. Even though I wanted to give up, I was done. When you're struggling with fatigue and depression and things like that, those lower emotions, you just so easy to get stuck in it. Any roadblock just demoralizes you. And so that was all kind of around that same time. EFT wasn't working, and I proved it beyond any shadow of a doubt. After 5 years, it wasn't working for whatever reason. Sedona Method stopped working, and I didn't have the resources, the community to kind of keep me going like we do now. And so I shift my focus more on the medical side of the equation, and felt very despondent, very traumatized, very like cynical about that whole realm, you know, this whole personal growth and spirituality, for lack of a better term, realm, and healing through that. So it was a bitter pill to swallow and a rough patch to walk through that.
Yeah, it must have been. Sounds. How did it feel? It sounds just devastating.
Devastating. Yeah, I was ready to give up. I was like, when my symptoms first started, because everything collapsed so intensely and I couldn't do what I wanted to do, suicide was always in the equation, but it was never immediate. It was always like, okay, if I run out of like the internal resources, which is that drive and will to keep doing what is so hard to do, which when to give people people have a hard time understanding of like debilitating exhaustion and fatigue. Like when you get the flu really bad and it's so difficult, you're so heavy to like get out of bed and walk to go to use the restroom. Imagine that's your life. And that kind of gives you an idea to like grok it in your being of like what that's like day in and day out. And like life is demanding that you get up and go and like perform, and you just can't find that gear. You're pushing on the gas, but there's no gas in the car. It's like you're having to get out and push the car from behind to get anywhere. And so so suicide was always a far off, like if nothing else works, if I run out of insurance, and if I run out of money, and if I run out of the internal drive to keep forcing myself to do the things that feel impossible for me to do, like even doing EFT felt like I was lifting millions of pounds. And people are like, oh yeah, EFT, you just tap and it's so easy. And it's like, no, it's not. No, it's not. It requires so much will and force to just lift my fingers and tap. So it was like exhausting in and of itself just to tap, which is not the effect that it's meant to have. So it was demoralizing. That was a very consistent theme throughout my journey, is feeling demoralized and shattered. But then how do I pick myself back up and keep moving on?
But can I just jump in? Because I grew up pretty similar to where you grew up.
Yeah.
I also grew up in Orange County. I know that culture. I know how people think. My father, he was never sick in a day in his life. He will tell
Yeah.
you, at great length if you are willing to listen to this. And by the way, get off your ass and just do something, because, that's how it works. That's the attitude.
Totally.
And so, yeah, not only do you have to deal with what's happening internally, but the rest of the world just kind of looks on and says, yeah, right.
No, exactly. That was the whole nother layer of the equation. The family, the you know what I mean? Like trying to get my dad in this case to pay for, like looking at my grandparents. It's like, well, what's wrong with you? They grew up from the greatest generation. You know what I mean? My dad was in Vietnam, like self-made people, and they had it to like do it. Like, and so it's like, what's wrong with you? You look healthy. And then I would have moments of like, okay, I can go exercise at a level that I used to. So, or I would only go out and socialize when I had the energy to do so. Otherwise, I was collapsed within. So I'd have these moments where bright spots, where I'd drink a whole bunch of caffeine and go to a social event, a holiday, and people would see me and they think, oh, that's how Joel is all the time. They didn't realize that I'd go home and collapse and like be done. I was done. Like to recover from that one little expenditure. It's like using your credit card, trying to live on your credit card with no income coming in. You have to pay the debt somehow. There's always, you know what I mean? Like you've got it. You can't just live on your credit card with no income.
So how did you pick yourself up from that point?
I kept telling myself just one more try. And so on some level, I kind of had to lie to myself, because I was like, okay, if this treatment doesn't work, then suicide started to become more and more real the longer I went into it, because it got harder and harder. When you try so many things, like in my other coaching community outside of the Sedona Method, there's a lot of people who work in addiction recovery. And it's so important to like get people some measure of hope and results quickly so they can buy in and keep doing it, because it's a long process. It's a marathon. But I didn't have that, like I was having to coach myself through this. So I almost on some level had to become slightly delusional and say, okay, if this treatment doesn't work, I'll hold off on ending my life until this treatment proves itself, but I'll give 100% to this treatment, and then those doctors, for example, I had Lyme disease, I had exposure to toxic mold and heavy metals, and I had a lot of concussions. So that's kind of the medical side of the equation that wasn't being addressed, which could give us a clear picture as to why maybe EFT wasn't working as well as it could have. Things like that. So that's, some context as to what else we know now, because there's been a lot of developments in the Sedona Method, as well as EFT and other of those psychospiritual tools to help shift on an energetic level that can interfere with the process. We do need a more robust protocol depending on what your issues are, which is why I address things the way I address them, because of what I went through if I'm dealing with somebody. So food is important, but it's not necessarily the be all end all. Everybody's so unique. But I just kept telling myself just one more time, so like these Lyme disease doctors, that after a few years, they're like, Joel, we've done everything we can do. I already knew this spiel, like it's coming up, because I've felt it so many times, experienced it so many times, but they introduced me to somebody. And so because they had introduced me to somebody, it was like, okay, well, it's still kind of their treatment. You know what I mean? So I'm still kind of affiliated with them. So I would kind of like redefine, like, okay, well, technically that treatment didn't not work. They referred me to this person. And so I'm going to keep working with this person. And if this person doesn't work, then I'll end my life. You know what I mean? So I would keep kind of like reframing it and redefining it, and just one more time. And that's when I really got deep into the science of transformation, the science of healing, the science of success, and these kind of basic success principles that apply to any person, any situation, no matter what area they want to become successful in. Like if you look at a Jesus or a Buddha, they were successful spiritually. Or if you look at like a Navy SEAL or a successful athlete or entrepreneur or anybody, they apply the same basic principles to their given modality, goal, as anyone. It doesn't matter. So it's, you know, like discipline, consistency, focus, awareness, like these basic things, repetition, you know what I mean? Keep doing the same thing over and over. You just drill it in. Like if you want to become a good soccer player or football, the rest of the world calls it, which is a better name. If you want to learn a new skill, you just keep doing it over and over and over. You practice, and then you become aware of, okay, what am I doing? How can I adjust it? Because if you do the same thing over and over and over again, you get the same results. So you kind of have to tweak it a little bit to kind of, you know, figure it out from a different way. And I'm using language, not in the Sedona Method context. I'm speaking just off the cuff, you know. You know, like trying to assess a new way through, find a new way through is just constant process of refinement, constant process of, okay, that didn't work, back up, look at it, and try it again from a different way. Back up, look at it, try it again from a different way. And so that's creativity. That's entrepreneurial success. They're the people who failed the most. They just didn't give up. That's really the only thing. They just didn't give up, and they had those basic underlying patterns or programs in place that allowed them to tweak it enough for it to finally shift, you know. And like that's what I appreciate, Stephen. You know, I've had this conversation, this Silicon Valley ethos of iterate, just keep iterating. You know, it's never done is better than perfect. You know, I grew up with a lot of perfectionist tendencies, and it's got to be done right the first time or else, you know, like a sense of punishment. And so those were a lot of things I had to overcome on a personal level that were also in the way of me being willing to keep getting up and get going, and that make the failures not quite as demoralizing as they were when I started, you know, to just embrace the process of, okay, this didn't work, so what? What's next? What can I do different?
There's something that you touched upon. You know, the Sedona Method, there is a kind of a trap you can fall into. Of course, we come to the Sedona Method for relief. You usually have a problem of some kind that we want to solve. And so when we're letting go, we want to accomplish something. Do you see where I'm leading with this? So the thing about releasing is that it can also contain a desire for control. I want to release itself is actually a desire to control the process of releasing. And so I know I've been through a lot of patches like that where I'm just pushing. And I feel like I'm getting nowhere, because in fact, all that I'm doing contains this desire to control, which of course comes from, I mean, why wouldn't I want to control, obviously, right? Why else would I do this kind of thing? And so what that led me to was an understanding of welcoming or allowing, opening. You know, beyond the first step of the Sedona Method, or the first basic exercise that we all work with, of course, is could you let that go? Would you let that go, and when? And yeah, that can actually work as well too. But what I find is that for myself, there's a lot more effective. I get a lot more work out of, could you just open to what's already here? You know, could you allow that? By the way, guess what? It's here anyway. So that's a much more open approach. And that's, I think this came to me and a few other people in the community a couple years ago, but it was such an important and useful insight.
Yeah, I agree. And in regards to that, a few things come up. It may have, I remember in my first round, that was first 4 years of the Sedona Method. I remember Hale talking about, because, you know, the Sedona Method has evolved and it's much more now fifth wave freeway, and a lot of people come into it and then they get really psyched about that, and so then they kind of poo-poo like the first four tools. I remember Hale talking about in those first 4 years back in the day, it may have been Ramana Maharshi, he quoted him about the use of tools and whatnot. It's like, well, if you fall into a thorn bush and you're covered in thorns, you take out one thorn, and then it's the best tool to take out all the rest of the thorns. And once you've taken out all the thorns, you can throw that thorn away. So tools have their place And based upon where people are at, it's society, so to speak. We do need some form of control to access those deeper levels where welcoming is more available. And so, to quote Ramana Maharshi again, another tool that I've learned is wholeness work by Connie Ray Andreas. And she was studying Ramana Maharshi, and she was, struggling with her own issues. And she knew she had to go further beyond more than what she had ever learned before. She was a student of Milton Erickson and like NLP and hypnosis and whatnot. And so this is what she said, is that like Ramana Maharshi, right? He only gave out one tool. Who am I? Basically, like, who am I? And a generous, like, from all the people that were introduced to that, a generous number would be that it worked for 1 in 10,000, that tool. And like, it was more likely closer to somewhere in between 1 in 10 to 1 in 100,000 that could actually start with that tool. Because for him, it just happened and it worked, and it was, like kind of a spontaneous thing, right? So he couldn't really reverse engineer it. But I think it's the same with society as well. And so on some level, it is useful to start with those more, let's say, less refined tools, or less advanced, for lack of a better word, to meet people where they're at. And then as they're ready, release those more controlling tools into the more allowing tools, and then beyond that. So that's my approach in it, and that's the way I see. And when I'm working with people, it's like the average individual, you don't just like bring out the fifth way on them. Like, you start where they're at. Like, could you let that go? You have free will. You pretend like they have free will, and there's all that stuff matters, and it works. And it gets them to the point where they could open up to, oh, I could allow that instead of fight against that. Oh yeah, well, fighting against it just seems to make it worse anyways. Most people have an intuitive sense of that, like when anxiety comes on, if they just try to force anxiety away, it just spirals. Exactly. And so most people have that sense of it. So, but they need to, like, they need that bridge to get them to the point where, like, oh, I can welcome it and allow it, and it's not going to get worse. Oh, so those are big transitional moments, and big ahas, and big beauties. And I think even like in the Sedona Method community, people start out with the Sedona Method, and like, I just couldn't connect with hell, and so they went to the release technique. And the release technique is a much more blunt, tool, much more controlling, and then they came back to the Sedona Method, and then it was like, oh, now hell makes sense, So
I always look at the Sedona Method as a tool chest. It has a whole set of tools. And you were talking about Larry Crane, the release technique, and he actually has a whole, I wouldn't say different set, but he has additional tools that are very interesting and useful,
Yeah, exactly.
And I think what's also happening within the community, well, Hale obviously comes up with different things from time to time. That's been the evolution of the Sedona Method. But even among ourselves, different things kind of come up from time to time and become the plaything of the month,
Yeah. No, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. It's like go ahead, Katya, if you have something to say.
No, I'm just curious about your story. Like, since you were disappointed with the method, but you are back. So what made you come back? What happened in between?
Yeah. Good question. Well, there was about a 12-year gap. And so I went down the road of mostly like diving deep, just as deeply as I did in the Sedona Method and those types of tools, into health and well-being, which I was doing those things, but most of my, like 80% of my focus was on like Sedona Method and that type of like approach to healing, where if you delete it, resolve it, release it, then health naturally is restored. And so I did go get treatment for Lyme disease, mold, heavy metal toxicity. And so that was a big deal. I had astronomical levels of toxic mold in my system. And down that path, like, I kind of became so cynical with like the spiritual stuff that, and my symptoms were still so insane. Well, part of it, I guess I could say, I tend to be an all or nothing type of individual. So I go all in. and I just jump in the deep end and just go for it. So my detox system is shut down. So if anybody's, I'm going to speak more like medical terminology. So methylation, MTHFR. It's like it looks like an acronym for mother effer, but it's not. But if you're methylating well, it's a complex chemistry in your body that the end result is glutathione, and glutathione is responsible for detoxing the body. And so mine had collapsed. I wasn't producing glutathione. And so we knew, medically speaking, through a lot of testing, that my body was not detoxing. About 25% of the human population, once they get exposed to toxic mold, their systems can't eliminate it. They need some sort of medical intervention. I was one of those. It was like I had the worst luck in the world, you could say, right? If you want to look at it through that term, like everything all at once and everything just shut down. And so once I started getting rid of all that, it was like, okay, maybe I'm a little better, like what else is going on? That's why that collective of doctors, who were some of the best doctors in the world for that complex of illness, because oftentimes they tend to go together. They introduced me to a guy who had a near-death experience, and he helped people, let's say, increase their frequency or awaken to that grander version of themselves. And in the process of that, they would find ways of healing themselves or resolving their money issues or whatever. And so I finally agreed to start working with him, even though I had so much resistance to kind of coming back into this realm. I also just want to say, and maybe we can show a photo of it, because of the detox, that's why I brought that up. I took that to its logical end. I was also doing a lot of like nutritional protocols, a lot of like nutritional detoxes, like fasting, cleansing. So I was really doing that because I knew, medically speaking, it wasn't just like, oh, I read it on the internet and I'm going to do a cleanse. It was like, medically speaking, it was verifiable. I was toxic. I was like a human garbage, like dump. Like this doctor who did the detox, genetic testing for the methylation. She said, Joel, I have no clue how you're walking, how you're talking, or functioning at the level that you are, even though you're barely functioning according to your own definition. She worked with people who are severely autistic, who are severely mentally ill, and severely compromised and unable to care for themselves. She's like, you should be a vegetable. You should be hospitalized and need 24-hour care. It's just your heart, your drive. I don't know what it is. But based upon our tests and how toxic you are compared to other people who have, you're the worst out of everyone I've ever seen she's like, an MD and a PhD. She's been in practice for 30 plus years. She's like, you should be severely compromised and unable to take care of yourself, a total vegetable. So you're a walking miracle. I don't know how you're doing what you're doing. But based upon that, eventually she said, after a year, I can't help you anymore. I can't take your money. I don't know why you're not getting better, but just don't give up. So there was doctors like her who were, even though they couldn't help me, they said, don't give up. Just keep experimenting with something. Try something else. In fact, go do that. And so I would go try whatever their last suggestion was. So long story short, after all years and years and years of fasting and cleansing and doing more and more and more, if I told you the amount of cleansing that I did, it is heroic amounts of cleanses. So the logical end of that was to do a long-term water fast. And so I did, and I didn't have a goal in mind other than to just be healthy and to do it safely. So if that was 10 days, I would do 10, because fasting is a very challenging thing. It's not easy. And so I ended up doing 46 days on water, no food, only water. So
46 days, only water.
Days. Only water, no food, zero food. And I went deep within to just like focus on myself, to release, to face whatever I had to. I found out after the fact that, just to put this in perspective, because I was also really down on myself, really hard on myself. My self-worth was like in the shitter. My sense of like being a man was like totally like done. I was like emasculated. I had zero agency in life. There was no romance on the equation for me. There was no like passion in life. Like I was just struggling to get through the day. That's why I was willing to take such heroic measures because I wanted to live a good life. I wanted to live a fantastic life, a big life, a life where you could look back and write a story about it. And your ancestors, you know, down the line, be like, oh my God, that guy was amazing. I wanted to be impressive. And so that's why I did what I did. And so I found out that David Blaine, when I was trying to heal and recover from that water fast, because it did damage to me. I went too far. It was not appropriate for me. And it was a purist version of water fasting. It needed more medical intervention because we are now introduced to so many man-made toxins that water fasting alone, the old traditions alone, are not sufficient enough for. And so, so I caused a lot more damage to my brain and my nervous system. And a lot of the heavy metals this is before I went to those doctors and before I realized the significance of heavy metals. They got kind of, when you fast, if you don't eliminate it, it gets stirred up and you got to eliminate it, you know, layer by layer, kind of like with releasing. You can get overwhelmed. And if you're not releasing it, like what gets triggered can overwhelm your system. And so, yeah, it goes into a more sensitive area of the body. Somehow that tends to be a thing. So my nervous system was just fried. I used to have a photographic memory. I couldn't remember anything. You know, it was like Alzheimer's, basically. Like it was crazy how that happened as a direct result of the water fast. And the ayahuasca actually turned out to be not necessarily the best choice for me at the time, considering the circumstances, or maybe I just needed a more robust medical protocol at the time, because we're really early days when ayahuasca that was like, still, I had no idea that it was going to explode like it has now. It was like fringe element. Everybody was afraid of it. It was illegal. I mean, it still is, but it was even more illegal. Like, and so you're just, you know, okay, maybe this will work. And you take a jump off the cliff and see if you fly. And so I collapsed really hard after those things.
Wait, so what year did you do the water fast?
Around 2011.
And following that, you did ayahuasca, do I understand?
No, I did ayahuasca first.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And then I got into the raw veganism after the ayahuasca. And then I did the water fast at the tail end of the raw veganism. And then after the raw veganism, I had to move back in the water fast. I had to move back in with my parents, which was the most demoralizing, humiliating. I think that was low point, right? To move back in with my parents. And that's when I started the Lyme disease treatment, was after I moved back in with my parents, because we were trying to like reconfigure things. So that was around 2013-ish that I started the Lyme disease treatment. And you know, through that, I slowly got better over the years. And I ended up realizing, oh, I've got a ton of concussions, because the neurology was driving me crazy. Something snapped in my brain. Like after the water fast, I had to relearn how to walk. You know, like all my muscle memory was gone. So from an athlete, you know, lifelong athlete, to like, I can barely walk. I can't jump a fence, to like go for a walk. Like, dude, I got to start from scratch. And then something snapped in my brain around 6 years ago. And I had to relearn how to talk, basically. I could talk, but my brain was spinning so fast, out of control. And that's when suicidality hit massively. Like I couldn't, my brain was hyper-focused on ending my life immediately. And so I had to find a way to navigate through that about 6 years ago. So I couldn't have a conversation because my brain would spin too much out of control and I'd become so destabilized. And so through that, I was like, okay, my nervous system is off. Oh, there's all these history of concussions that never got treated. So I got on a traumatic brain injury protocol. That helped. But that wasn't enough. So I went to do ibogaine. And it's a protocol for traumatic brain injury and complex PTSD. Because I had complex PTSD like a madman. I could barely go to the store. I would randomly just get involved in like road rage incidents where I was ready to kill somebody. So I had to be really careful. I was scared to go to the store because I would, you know, like cross that line. You know, people with PTSD and head injury, people are sometimes afraid of them because they don't understand what that is and kind of how to be with people like that. So I felt that about myself. Like, I'm a monster. I can't trust myself in any situation now because it got so bad on that level. And so doing the ibogaine and the 5-MeO-DMT protocol for traumatic brain injury was very helpful. It as well was not, the be-all, end-all. And then through that process, I got introduced to the psychedelic coaching. That doctor's like, Joel, because I was like desperate. I knew that I couldn't keep going like this. My parents are getting older. The money's running out. You know what I mean? Like I knew that I had to find some vocation. And coaching had kind of always been on the agenda, but I just never could get strong enough to do anything about it, to help people, because I was so collapsed in on my symptoms. And so he was like, do this psychedelic coaching. And I was just like, I roll psychedelic coaching. Yeah, right. Okay, I guess it's a thing. I knew it was getting popular. So that's what led me down the path of getting certified as a coach for psychedelic prep integration. And then as I was going through that process that started about 2 years ago, that's when I was like, well, I don't want to do just psychedelic coaching. What else can I do? And that's when I jumped back into the Sedona Method. I'd spent so much time doing this tools, I could easily integrate it into a session. So I might as well see what that's all about. I jumped into a facilitator training. That's when it started. And then right after that facilitator training, that's when Hale sent out the email for the mentorship group, like, hey, send me a video. And it was this email that was kind of innocuous. I might put it up on the website if it's a good enough video. But then it turned into organically this mentorship group, which is the first certification coaching and the first instructor certification that he's had in over 20 years since I started the Sedona Method. So it was, in some respects, you could say I have the worst luck. Other times you look at my life and like, you have the best luck. And so I just stumble into things where all these big doors start to open for me, like the Sedona Method and this private mentorship group. I forced myself to make a video. I was still so messed up mentally. And I just did a guided release, and it passed. That's all that mattered. I got accepted into this mentorship group that we are all a part of, that this, this podcast series has grown out of, and it's turned into a certification. So it's like another certification that I can put under my belt. And I will be going back to the psychedelic coaching community and offering, getting paid to teach the Sedona Method if they accept my proposal. So slowly I've been able to work myself into a vocation and move towards sustainability, even though I'm not quite there yet, but I'm close. I'm the closest I've ever been. I still have big challenges. There's big question marks. I'm still not where I would like to be. But these tools have just helped me, let's say, manage the challenge and open up to new possibilities and stay as fresh as possible and willing to try it again when you want to give up and things like that. And realize that sometimes some people need a robust protocol. We are humans and beings, and we need to address both of them appropriately. And everybody's different. And there is no one answer for everyone, unfortunately.
I think the Sedona Method is a very useful tool for that kind of therapy, like you said. And I'm working with one client right now who has just done ayahuasca. And so I've had the experience of working with her and the integration of the experience. Because, of course, that kind of medicine has a way of stirring up a lot of things.
Yeah.
Whereas, the method really is about just allowing it to flow through and process.
Yeah.
Nice combination.
That's great. It's great to integrate with those types of tools, because like you've experienced, ayahuasca especially can be very destabilizing, and people aren't quite prepared for it. And so to come out and have someone like you help them process through all the stuff that got stirred up can be very helpful, and in fact, in some cases, life-saving.
Yeah. Well, of course, with all that you've been through, you are uniquely qualified to help others. I mean, is there anything that you haven't tried? And that's a rhetorical question, but
yeah. Well, let's just put it this way. My decision-making process, because I was so compromised, had to be so simple, but just the risk reward, you know what I mean? Does this have a higher ability potential to help me versus hurt me? and I was willing to do anything that wasn't inherently like degrading. And like if there was the chance that it could be healing and restorative, and it made sense to me at the time, and the synchronicities were aligned, you know, like when I did that water fast, I met 3 people in the course of like a month that had all done a 40-day water fast, and that was the pivotal thing for them. So that was like the deal. That was what pushed me over the edge. Okay, I got to do a long-term water fast. So, you know, and at times I would say, if the devil himself showed up to me and said, Joel, I will alleviate all your sufferings and give you the life that you want if you sell your soul to me. You know, when you die, like, you're mine. You know what I mean? But like, I was in such a bad space that I said, if that happened, I would be very tempted. It would be hard to say no. I'm not saying I would say yes, but it would be hard to say no if that type of offer was put on the table and it was the real deal. But yeah, as long as it had the potential to help me, I was willing to do it, even to my own detriment. So I kind of had to take the perspective of, you know, those guys who were the first generation of NASA pilots. You know, they were the ones who were in those experimental jets trying to break the sound barrier, and the amount of crashes that would happen. And then once they turned those jets into rockets, it was like 1 out of every 5 was going to blow up. And they knew that, and they still got into it. Now it's a much more refined science. It's almost like going, like flying. Like, it's not that big of a deal to get into space as far as the risks are concerned. And so that, I guess you could say, one of my first, I have struggled with some self-medicating and slight addiction issues because of the symptoms just got too much, and these tools were not working. You know, I started drinking and things like that. But I would say my first addiction was adrenaline and cortisol. So I got my first concussion when I was 3, and I got my most serious one when I was 5. I was hospitalized in a BMX racing accident. So I've always, you know, I got my first skateboard when I was 5, and I proceeded to ride it off the roof. And this was before the internet, before those types of extreme things were like normal, like you saw them everywhere. So you're being influenced and pushed in that direction. So this is in the early 80s, you know? So I always had a proclivity to extremes and to adrenaline activities. So I was always known for that. I was always drawn to that. That was my happy place, you know, doing some sort of skateboarding, snowboarding, surfing, BMX, you know, playing as a sport. That's where I was okay. Once I sat down, I was like daydreaming. I would check out. Like, that concussion at 3 years old that didn't get treated really had a heavy effect on me. And it kind of like, I would always like check out and just be daydreaming. I got good grades in school. I was naturally, I guess I could absorb the information through osmosis, but I was always like looking out the window. I wish I was snowboarding. I wish I was skateboarding. I wish, you know. So, but that attitude, it helped me in a sense, just that willingness and that inherent ability to take risks, you know, because that's what I did. I grew up taking risks, and for the most part, I was successful, you could say. And on another level, you could say I really paid a heavy price for it, because I took a lot of lumps, and that did contribute to my downfall. You know, it was like, eventually you have to take enough lumps, and eventually you kind of collapse. The system can only handle so many if you don't resolve them and deal with them as you're going through the process. You know, now we have a much better idea of injuries and head injuries and, you know, protocols and whatnot. Back then, we just didn't. You know, you sleep it off, you get up, you shake it off, and you go back into it. So it's a different era, and now we know better. But that attitude is what drove me through, my willingness to try anything and everything, like with a long-term water fast or ayahuasca at the time. Ayahuasca, people were like, you're crazy, you're nuts. Now it's much more acceptable, much more, even though there's a lot of stigma around it, a lot of risk associated with it, but we know a lot more about it. And maybe a lot of my challenges could have been mitigated with what we know now. So that's another motivating factor for why I'm willing to, let's say, be in the psychedelic and the plant medicine realm, is to mitigate risk and to help educate people to enhance their experience as much as is possible, and to filter out the downside as much as is possible, and to give people a very cautionary, clear-eyed, like, idea of what they're going into. Like if you're going to go do ayahuasca, you need to know what you're going to face so you can be mentally prepared for it and have tools and resources to handle the experience, and then the backside, you know, and stick the landing, you know, as much as possible. So yeah.
Well, that's actually a very, very important voice, because I mean, over the years, I've known a lot of people younger than myself at festivals and events and so forth. Especially, there's a lot of psychedelic events in the world now. And me personally, I just I find that a festival, for example, for the most part, is really not the right venue for me to have that experience. Unless I'm way off in the forest somewhere to myself with a group of people that I trust very much, you know, etc., with the food and so forth that we need. Yeah, it's not a casual experience.
That's an advanced place to do psychedelics in. And that's usually people's first experience.
Yeah, of course.
Ideally, you'd have a lot of training under your belt, not just with psychedelics, but with the basics of like grounding, you know, orienting yourself in space and time, understanding the nature of these medicines, that they can take you to a dark place. But if you relax into it, welcome the experience, Sedona Method type stuff, then all of a sudden it can switch and can turn in from hell to heaven in a second. And so, and all the extra stimulation can really throw you off and take you into a dark space. So people have some really heavy experiences in those festival settings. And so now there's a whole culture of harm reduction tents and safe spaces. And I've been a part of that,
Yeah.
you know, just for people like myself to be in there. So when somebody does come in and they're possessed by a demon, you know, and they think they're Jesus or whatever, right? You know, like all these crazy things that can happen when the uninitiated take the wrong substance in the wrong environment, or too much, or it's laced with something because that's the way the world is at the time. And they can go down into a really dark space. And so you can help minimize that and bring them out of that and help them, you know, at least calm down so they can ride it out, you know.
Well, it's super important to do these kinds of things with other people that you trust and who have experience and who can help you if you have a problem, if you're in a bad spot, that kind of thing.
Huge.
Yeah. Actually, when I'm at festivals, and I haven't been to festivals for years and years, but what I used to do is just walk around with, you know, a big container of fresh water. Because what you see is people, you know, they just get all enthusiastic and forget to drink for half a day. And, you know, the next thing you know, it's
lights out. Yeah. No.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. No,
Right.
We know amazing things now. And so if you go to a festival now, and generally speaking, there's all these safety precautions. And, you know,
Right.
I went to a festival. I'm not a big festival guy. And I don't do a lot of, I do microdosing of psychedelics. I don't do a lot of macrodosing, you know, like a dose that would give you a visionary experience that most
The
people.
so-called heroic dose. Yes.
Or, well, there's different levels of doses, right? So
Right.
like, let's just say mushrooms, since you use heroic dose, that's normally associated with mushrooms. That's usually 5 grams, right? And like, generally speaking, like a gram of mushrooms could be like a barbecue experience, more social, you know, light and just fun, and you can still engage. 2 grams, so it might be like, oh, okay, you can go out into the woods and go for a walk and still find your way back. You know, like 5 grams, like please stay inside. That's generally associated with like the heroic dose levels, and everybody's different. And then there's 10 grams. And then there's what is called, a friend of mine in the community, Ian McCall, if anybody knows him, he's a retired world champion MMA fighter. And these substances and these approaches have saved his life. You know, he was a monster. That's his quote. He was a monster before he got into this realm that we are all in, that the Sedona Method is a part of, and that the proper use of psychedelics is a part of as well. He did 20 grams of mushrooms. That's called the God dose.
I don't know about that.
And he did that with the original tribes in Mexico, that was their tradition. And this was, I don't remember her name, but it's the lady who's the first to introduce mushrooms in this context to Westerners. I think they were surfers in Baja or whatever. I could be wrong. But it was, you know, in the 60s. She's like the grandma of introducing these medicines to the let's say modern society, and are used for it. So he did 20. I don't have any desire to do 20 grams at any point in the near future. For the most part, I'm sticking with microdosing, unless a special occasion, because I feel really drawn or I feel the need. So, yeah.
So I must say you are really a good example of being persistent. You really have had that drive to test one more thing and take that one more step, one more day.
Yeah.
So I think that's a huge benefit for you when you're working with people, that you really know what you're talking about. You've been down and you've worked your way up. So I think that's quite a gift, though not pleasant to get and work through.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a creative side, and one weekend a few years back, after I was taking maybe 3 times the amount of a normal microdose, so I was feeling the slight effects of mushrooms, and I was doing an intensive weekend of meditation. And after that weekend, I don't know if anybody's familiar with the crystal skulls, Bill Hedges' crystal skulls. I was meditating with that guy who the collective of Lyme doctors sent me to him to help me out. And he was meditating with the crystal skulls, Bill Hedges' crystal skulls, and they're generally speaking an amplifier of frequencies. So it was a very intensive weekend nonetheless. And after that weekend on Sunday night, all of a sudden it was like my brain opened up and I was just downloading a spoken word piece, a poem. And it was a very powerful poem. And one of the lines in it was, if I had a superpower, I'd say it's persistence. So you're right on that. And when I look back, it's like, yeah, I have been persistent. I have been, that's one of the things that resonates when I speak, is most people have a sense of credibility from me and a sense of trustability and a sense like, okay, he's really gone through it. Like, this guy's gone through hell. At times I would have described it indescribable hell that most people just don't get when they just look at me. Most people are like, oh yeah, you know, he's had it easy, or he's got it all together, or whatever. And it's like, that's the furthest thing from it. Like, when I say I feel like I'm a walking miracle, like I should not be here, I don't say that lightly. The level of hell that I've faced, the level of suicidality that I've faced, the level of like challenges of like, okay, the money isn't there. You know, like I probably spent, let's just assume, out of pocket on the whole thing, $300,000 to $500,000 US over 20 plus years. And we didn't have that. It wasn't there. I came from a middle-class family. It's not like I had a trust fund where it's like, oh yeah, I just spend money. It was like, how are we going to pay for the next thing? And wait, this doctor's $800 an hour. Like, how are we going to do that? You know? So, or this retreat is $5,000. Are you kidding me? You know, like that Ibogaine, it was a weekend long treatment, $4,000, you know? So I was constantly having to find ways to, like, the first way I learned how to meditate back in Huntington Beach days was, I don't have the money to pay for this. There's a meditation teacher. I went onto his website and I was like, oh, he's writing a book. I started to read some of his manuscripts. I was like, well, he's got a lot of errors in here. I studied philosophy and theology in grad school. So grammar, that's where I learned grammar. I didn't learn grammar in elementary school. Like, I breezed through like learning how to write and read. I learned actual grammar and syntax way too late when I was in grad school, but I knew it. So I went to him and I said, hey, you've got all these mistakes in your book. I'll edit it if you teach me how to meditate. He's like, great, I need an editor. So that type of attitude and creative thinking and willingness to just do whatever the F it takes is what carried me through. And when I look back on it, it's like, I don't know how I got through it. I don't know how.
If I circle back to the method, which is clearly a part of your journey, which is really, really quite breathtaking. How would you say, or what is Sedona Method giving you right now? What is the reason you have it in your toolbox?
I guess on one hand, the way I got introduced to it, those synchronicities, is trying to trust those signals that the universe gives you that don't make logical sense, right? And so then the way I came back to it after that 12-year absence and going through like the bitterness of cynicism and like, it didn't work, there was a lot of trauma around that. And it took a lot for me to finally come back to it. So on one hand, it's now there's a community and technology that makes it accessible without having to fork out a couple grand to go to a retreat or listen to the same damn CDs over and over and over again, because they eventually, like as Hale says, the mind starts to like guard itself against the same tool over and over and over again, which is why different approaches are helpful. So it is a relief for me to use it at times. Most of the time I still need like a recording, and that's the best way for me to do it, is to listen to a recording. And now with so many years, there's so many recordings, so I can switch it up with different recordings and just lay down and just kind of relax and go into a welcoming space and kind of take a nap. I need that almost every day. And so it's helping me manage the challenges that I still face, because I'm really having challenges acclimating to normal life, because I was out of the mix for so long. And so I'm having to learn everything all at once, from professional, the craft, to technology. Like I was living off the grid essentially for 12 years. So it's helping me manage the overwhelm. It's helping me open up to the possibility that I could like earn an income and be self-sufficient for the first time in my adult life, and just keep opening up to that possibility. Like I take my walk, I go some morning, like I wake up in the morning and that's the hardest time for me. So, it's like, it's just deciding that I've had enough of this old pattern, whatever it is, and then choosing what it is I'd like in place of it, and just keep affirming that and opening to that and acknowledging those qualities of beingness that we would say in the Sedona Method lingo, or the one light and love that is everywhere. Just keep acknowledging that when you feel so separate or whatever. So it is helping me just keep moving forward and embracing the challenges as something that is here for me, not something that's happening to me. Because at times it's easy to feel like a victim and nothing's gonna work. I just want to give up. I still struggle with that, but it's helping me face the challenges that feel insurmountable, and making them, when you like break it down, to just come into the one moment that's right here, right now. Nothing from the past, nothing from the future, just what's here now. And that is that's what helps you get through. That's what helped me get through the past, is finally chunking it down, breath by breath, step by step, 1 millisecond at a time, one millimeter at a time. It doesn't matter how slow you go, as long as you keep going.
One thing I take from your story really is that the wound becomes the gift in the end.
In the end, eventually, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually, with persistence. Yeah. So that's, I guess, my biggest credential, is what I went through and how I faced it. And it's what I never in a million years thought, but now people tend to show me respect and appreciation in ways that I never expected. And I can speak to a broad cross section of people, from high performers and like retired special forces guys to people who are in the depths of severe trauma, highly abused individuals who've gone through hell and are still in it. And it's like, hey, if I can do it, you can do it, and this is how you do it. So
perseverance, I think is really one of our key human traits. We were never, we never had the eyesight of the eagle. We could never be as ferocious as the lion. What we did was we just kept tracking the prey for days.
With little food to no food. Eventually
the prey will tire out,
Yeah. Yeah.
The human just keeps on going. That's our superpower.
That is, I believe it's innate in humanity. And whether you're spiritual but not religious, religious but not spiritual, whether you're more scientific or atheist, there is a so-called human potential or human drive to improve, to survive, that is undeniable. That's gotten us to this point, and that you can tap into regardless of your worldview or your spiritual beliefs or lack thereof. You know, like there is something that wants even the atheist to improve, you know? So what is that drive in us? And it is essentially persistence. And for a lot of us, that is covered over. Like that was not very evident in me, you know, like I wanted it the easy route, you know, like most of us in Western society, we're a convenience oriented society. Give me a pill, you know, like drive me through the drive-through. Who wants to cook a meal, you know? But I had to learn discipline and persistence and fortitude and forbearance in ways, and fierce grace. Like nothing came easy except when it did. And like that first experience of the Sedona Method retreat in 2005, I did not do anything. And all of a sudden I was in ecstasy, right? So, but sometimes you have to work for a long time to be in a position where that can happen. Other times it just happens, you know?
But isn't also, do you notice somehow in the beginning, of course, we really feel motivated by our suffering.
Yeah.
And so we, you know, it's like whatever it takes, I will do. And I'm speaking here from my own experience, but after a while, it just sort of seems like, hey, wait a second. I'm kind of being pulled in that direction rather than me pushing.
Yeah.
After a while, the flow, you just, something like what you described of, you know, driving 7 hours from Huntington Beach to Sedona, listening to the cassettes or the DVDs or the CDs or whatever the technology we're using at that time, because we are that old. But no, it speaks to the two sides of it. On the one hand, yeah, actually, it's that internal push and drive and so forth. But on the other hand, isn't it also just that pulling, that flow?
Yeah. Yeah.
That synchronicity. Yeah.
It's what is it? I think Lester said at first you realize like everything is just a dream, and then you realize eventually that it was a dream that never was. And so I very much agree to the idea that there are stages in growth per se. And let's just say most of humans are in slave or victim consciousness, like down here. It's like AGFLAP, right? Apathy, grief, fear. And so and you can't just jump, if you're in apathy, you can't just jump from apathy into like peace. Like there's a process of releasing through all the apathy, all the grief, all the fear, however that looks for you. So in the same way, it's like most of us are starting out. I felt like a slave most of my life. Like just doing chores made me feel like a slave. Like, and I would rebel against it. And then just above slave is a victim, right? And that's one step above a slave, right? And then there's like in between, and then the next level, I guess you could say, is like the underdog mentality. And I think the only difference between an underdog and a victim is that an underdog is somebody who's running victim patterns with a pattern of persistence slapped onto it. So they keep getting up and trying and trying and trying and trying and trying. And then eventually they break through if they keep trying, and they release all that and they become, let's say, a master level where they kind of maintain, you know. And you could be a billionaire and still feel like an underdog, you know, like a lot of the tech people, you know, they were bullied and then they became the tech billionaire, but they're still feeling like a victim or bullied or whatnot, and like they're bullied by their success, so to speak. They're victimized by their money. And then there's the master level where you release beyond that and you're this like grand individual, like a Jesus or a Buddha, like that's who you think you are. And then the freeway takes you beyond that into just oneness, where there just is nothing whatsoever, everything, nothing, all at once. And so to me, that's the way I see stages of transformation. And they all have their place depending on where you're at. And everybody starts at a different place. But generally speaking, most of humanity is on the lower end of the spectrum, hence the earth and the state that it's in. And, those of us are along that path moving towards, like even now, like non-duality doesn't really speak to me. After 20 odd years, the only thing that still resonates with me about non-duality is the end of suffering. That's it. Yeah, I prefer to have no more suffering. But the whole idea of it, it's not sexy. It doesn't sell tickets. You know what I mean? Like, was it Robert Adams, I think? I don't know. He told Hale, like, and the only reason I'm going to disclose this because Hale said it. So that the Sedona Method is a great way to release people from their money. That's basically it's all it's good for. And I don't agree with that. I think it's very good to alleviate suffering and get people in the direction of truth and freedom and sustainable living. So I think it is more than just a great way to release people from their money. It also does help introduce the path of releasing them from their suffering and their the appearance of victimization and these repetitive patterns that we keep showing up in the world as, that despite of all of our technological advances, we're still very much barbarians with, you know, elite, elegant technology in our hands, you know, across as far as, you know, our species. So we still have some room for growth.
Thank you, Joel. There are so many questions I could still ask and would be interested in hearing the reply, but I think maybe we pause the conversation this time here and maybe continue later again.
Sure.
Thank you so much. It's been really interesting.
Yeah.
And humiliating to hear your story.
Thank you. Thank you.
Happy
Yeah.
to have you in the community.
Thank you.